Hi.
Hello again. We're in Genesis chapter 18. Abraham has met three men. And this is a marvelous segment having to do with the hospitality of the Semitic race, at least 2,000 years before Christ. And we want to read verses 4 to 8 in Genesis 18.
Let a little water be brought, and then you may all wash your feet and rest under this tree. Let me get you something to eat, so you can be refreshed, and then go on your way, now that you have come to your servant. Very well, they answered, do as you say. So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah. Quick, he said, get 3 seahs of fine flour, and knead it and bake some bread. Then he ran to the herd and selected a choice tender calf, and gave it to a servant, who hurried to prepare it. He then brought some curds and milk, and the calf that had been prepared, and set them before them. And while they ate, he stood near them under a tree.
So would we have ever thought when we were Jehovah's Witnesses about who does Abraham think he's showing hospitality to here? Because in verse 3 at the end of the last segment, he just addresses one of them at least as "O Lord," which is not peculiar when you're addressing strangers, especially strangers you have some regard for. There's no indication he knows who they are.
Yeah, he just saw 3 men. So yeah, if he'd known them, he probably would have said their names, but he just saw 3 men, and he behaves this way. I think that's a good lesson for us.
So, hospitality. Yeah, we'll get to that in a second, but the divine element in this, which is, of course, as a witness, you're taught that these were actually angels. When did he realize they were angels? Well, I think we need the rest of the chapter to reveal that. At
this point, I think he just believes they're men.
But of course, in the next segment, we find out he regards at least one of them not as an angel, but as the Lord. The Lord. That is, he uses the tetragrammaton. And I should say the text uses the tetragrammaton, for instance, in verse 10, but we won't get to that yet. So what would be missing that would probably elude most of us, not just because we're in a cult, but the rest of us who live in this culture, who don't think of this as normal life, where you see 3 strangers and you feel compelled to put before them what amounts to a royal banquet.
Yeah, this is, like eating meat wasn't a regular thing. So he's going all out to be hospitable to these 3 strangers.
So the marvelous thing is that at least 4,000 years ago we have cultures across the world who were not, even though they were pagans technically, and we have some doubt even as to the Semitic race at this point. Are they pagan yet? It doesn't appear so from the book of Genesis. They're henotheistic, if not purely monotheistic, probably in memory of, or at least in descent from their monotheistic ancestor Shem.
This hospitality is still commonly practiced in their country, right? Their land.
Certainly in the Middle East.
In the Middle East, you still hear people who visit there saying the people are very generous, hospitable. The food portions are very generous. They want you to sit down. They invite you to their homes. And they don't know you.
Now, this little detail in the very last verse there, the last sentence, he stood by them under the tree while they ate. We might not think much of that. I don't remember ever thinking about it in the old days. But that little detail is still observed in many. That little practice or tradition is still observed, not just in the Middle East, but in many cultures around the world. There's nothing too good for your guest.
You let them eat first.
And that reminds me of that text we all kind of know in Hebrews 13, where it says, "Do not neglect hospitality, for some, unknown to themselves, have entertained angels." It could be this very passage that's being alluded to there. So that would answer the question, if that is so, what did he know at this point? The truth is, he doesn't know anything yet until the meal proceeds, right?
Yeah, this is just a normal practice for him.
And by the way, I didn't realize this until I looked it up in the concordance. This is the very first time. Notice the word angel doesn't occur at all here, and it doesn't occur in the rest of chapter 18. The first time it does occur is in chapter 19, verse 1. 2 angels came to Sodom in the evening. Mm-hmm. And that's the very first time in the Bible that angels is plural. The only other time we think we've seen angels elsewhere, well, we did back in chapter 16, but there it was not an angel that Hagar had interaction with, the angel of the Lord. Mm-hmm. And then back in chapter 3 we met the cherubim who prohibited mankind from getting back into the Garden of Eden, etc. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, this is the first time we have angels, and they're not mentioned yet. So he thinks he's entertaining men, which makes the hospitality all the more remarkable.
Even in the next chapter, they just see them as men that have come to the town.
Mm-hmm. Here we've got Kidner remarking upon this. Christian commentators have been tempted to discern the 3 persons of the Trinity here, but the passage differentiates clearly between the Lord and his 2 companions, point number 1. And then he says, they're almost royal honors paid to a chance visitor. The fervent welcome, however, inconvenient the moment it, after all, was the midday siesta. The assurance that his rival is an honor, even a providence, and the lavish meal, deprecated as a morsel of bread, are still characteristic of Bedouin hospitality, even to the host's insistence, in some cases, on standing until his guests have finished. The reader can see how appropriate, beyond all imagining, was this deference. The New Testament goes on to show that there is more than coincidence here, and it does reference Hebrews 13, verse 2. Mm-hmm. And also it references Matthew 25, verse 35, which is where we have the sheep and the goats separated on the basis of
how they treat
the
brethren.
Christ's brethren, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then John Calvin. But the fact that God honored his benignity, or his goodness, and granted it to him as a reward, that angels should be presented to him for guests, was what he was not aware of, till they had made themselves known at the conclusion of the meal. It was therefore a merely human and civil honor which he paid them. And I think F.B. Meyer has something to say that is about the not just the fact of, not just the marvelous hospitality, but also the idea of communion, which is in this entire passage.
Mm-hmm. So F.B. Meyer, in his book called Abraham, said, "It was thus that the Son of God anticipated his incarnation and was found in fashion as a man before he became flesh. He loved to come incognito into the homes of those he cherished as his friends, even before he came across the slopes of Olivet, and to make his home in the favored cottage where his spirit rested from the din of the great city, and girded itself for the cross and the tomb. He rejoiced in the habitable part of the earth, and his delights were with the sons of men," quoting Proverbs 8, verse 31. "Nor is this all. There is no heart so lowly that he will not enter." There is no home so humble, but that he will make himself a welcome inmate. There is no table so poorly provided, but that he will sit thereat, turning water into wine, multiplying the loaves and fishes, and converting the simple meal into a sacrament. When seated at meat with those he loves, he still takes bread and blesses it, and breaks and gives to them. That's Luke 24:30. To each and all he says, as he stands laden with raiment, excuse me, as he stands laden with raiment, I can never say that, salve, gold and viands for the evening meal. Meats, right? Okay. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man hear my voice and open the door, I will come to him and will sup with him, and he with me. Revelation 3:20.
So Meyer nails the main point of all of this narrative is that God condescends
Yeah.
to have communion, personal communion with those he honors.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We would have missed that.
Yeah. Well, it seems against the grain of what we were taught as witnesses.
Mm-hmm.
So the intimacy with God, which always reminds me of the Genesis, Adam and Eve in the garden talking with the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
That intimacy that they had in daily communing with God, that seems so unnatural to us as witnesses, even the possibility of that.
Sure. Impossible.
Yeah, it's a booming voice from the heavens, that's it.
Maybe. And we don't get that either nowadays.
Yeah, that even is something beyond what we can imagine. So when we think of Paradise Earth, we still think of it as God's far away and not communing with you. There's no intimacy. It's still the same structure as we have now. And yet, what did Adam and Eve lose? They lost the intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
They were driven out of the garden, and they no longer had that fellowship that they enjoyed with the Lord.
So when we think of the loss of Eden, what do we think of? We think of the loss of physical paradise.
Yeah.
But the spiritual paradise, after all, we're told, is more important than that, right? If we're witnesses. But on the other hand, the restoration of paradise does not include that personal communion with God, the walking with God, talking with God.
Yeah, yeah.
Not even talking with Christ, who is our mediator officially.
Yeah, it just seems to be only endless life that we're thinking about.
Now, you have made a video on that subject in the C.S. Lewis series, right?
Yeah, so we should link that, I think, at the end.
So what did Adam and Eve lose? Was it physical blessings, or was it personal communion with God?
Mm-hmm.
So we'll link that. See you next time.
Mm-hmm.